If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, you know that I will often argue that the Federation, at least starting in the TNG era, but possibly also TOS, is somewhat of an authoritarian regime that controls its people through groupthink. As I've discussed before, we see this with the bigotry against the military and religion in Jean-Luc Picard, and the intolerance of the military-minded personnel in William T. Riker. This is gleaned both through dialogue and the way they treat anyone whom thinks differently from them. And don't even get me started on how Picard originally doesn't consider Data to be sentient and tries to take away his child. My opinion is only bolstered by Sisko when he says in the episode The Maquis, Part 2, that the problem with the Federation is Earth, that there is no poverty, no crime, no war. It's easy to be a saint in paradise. That the people of the Federation, especially in the inner core, don't have to deal with the struggles of others and look down upon those whom do. That could be an entire video in and of itself, but for now I want to focus on a piece of technology that is possibly the greatest advance in tech for an authoritarian regime since liberal ideology. The greatest advance in tech for an authoritarian government since the gun. The Combadge, first introduced as early as 2344, is an extremely powerful piece of technology. A Starfleet Combadge has the ability to constantly track its wearer anywhere that a Starfleet computer is present. A person wearing a Combadge whom uses a computer console is automatically logged as using said console. Wearing this tech makes it much easier and quicker to be transported away, and according to Voyager, the Combadge also assists the computers in monitoring your brain activity. Additionally, the Combadge can be utilized as an emergency beacon should it be cracked or activated by the user. While I think some of these attributes are worrisome, the most horrifying one I realized while looking at it is the fact that the Combadge's biggest function is as a universal translator. Don't get me wrong, this does make sense given how diverse the Federation is. This would allow the interactions of different species without the need to learn a common language. It also means that, effectively, every time an interaction occurs, the language is translated via the Combadge and sent to the other person. On the face of it, this doesn't seem like a bad thing. However, allow me to be very blunt. This is an absolutely fucking scary as shit piece of tech that has the ability to fundamentally change an entire society to whatever whims those at the top want. During a previous video, I discussed Transwarp and the change of the warp scale from TOS to TNG. I also made a jab at how in the shows we would hear aliens utilize the warp scale as well as use of other Starfleet terms. Which doesn't make any sense because, well, they'd have their own scales and words. Commenters, rightly in my opinion, pointed out how the universal translators probably just changed the wording to something that the Starfleet officers would understand. Which again, entirely logical and fixes that plot hole. But let me emphasize that point. It means that the universal translators deliberately changed the wording and possible intent of the alien language into something that Starfleet officers could understand. It would also change the words of the officers who would be using the TOS scale into the TNG scale for the officers who were learning the TNG scale. It changes speech. The Combadge, in effect, makes it so that people aren't actually talking to each other. They're just having a translator interpret what they are saying and pass it to the other person. This means that the Starfleet Corps of Engineers Admiralty have complete control over what people say to each other. And as we know, Starfleet Admiralty always does what's right. And we don't even know if the translator turns off if both species can speak the same language. It's possible that humans that are talking both in Terran are still having their words translated. Considering this, is it any surprise that we see TNG pacifism and a complete disdain for religion during the Next Generation? Because that is decidedly a change from the original series in just under 100 years. And that is extremely hard to do unless you modify the speech. I'm not going to get into real-world politics here, but seriously, consider some of the changes that has been made to our speech and how that has impacted the world, for good or bad. And these changes to speech wouldn't even have to be drastic. Change certain words to have negative connotations here and there and let the natural evolution of speech do the rest of the work. I mean, conservatives have been doing it for generations, so why not Starfleet? Ultimately, we see dramatic changes from the original series to the Next Generation. And while there are improvements in Deep Space Nine, vestiges of a changed Federation from the times of Kirk still exist. Now, if I'm honest, I don't think that the Combadge was the defining tool, that it made everything authoritarian. But it certainly could have helped. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below.